Yo, what's going on, everybody? Me and Lucas, we are back. We were able to check out a few films from the Sundance Film Festival
Mhm.
2021. We were able to watch it virtually. And yeah, we're about to go over this movie, Eight for Silver. Lucas, you ready?
Oh, definitely. This was when we got the list of films for the Sundance Film Festival. This was at the top of my list. This is something I really wanted to see. I wanted to see how would they do a retelling, reimagining of the werewolf origin slash saga. So I
Yeah,
was extremely interested going into this movie.
yeah. And I'll just go ahead and briefly read the synopsis for you guys. In a rural 19th century France, a mysterious, possibly supernatural menace threatens a small village. John McBride, a pathologist, comes to the town to investigate the danger and exorcise some of his own demons in the process. This was directed by Sean Ellis and written by Sean Ellis. This is also starring Boyd Holbrook, Kelly Reilly, and Altar Petrie. I believe that's her pronounce his
Mm-hmm.
last name.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Lucas, how did you feel about this film? And this is a non-spoiler review, guys, so don't worry
Yeah,
about us spoiling it.
yeah, we're not going to
Um,
spoil one bit of this film. First, let me say, Mr. Ellis. I'm, he's done a movie in the past that I really liked, and it was I'm not going to say this name right. Anthropod. I'm trying to
yeah,
say the name right. Yeah. Oh, I did say that. Great. I thoroughly enjoyed that movie, and coming into it, I kind of understood that as a director, his visuals are normally amazing, and this one stands up against some of the best you're going to ever see out of a horror movie. Visually, this movie is great. This
yeah,
It's a standout. It's stunning. Unfortunately, that's where it ends. It
yeah,
only ends with it being visually stunning. Um, just giving a quick overview of it, I thought it was too by the numbers. I thought it was too form, like just not good. Like I've seen so many horror movies. I'm a horror movie person. I love horror movies, and this one at times it felt like they wanted to dig too deep into attempting to create a new reimagining of a werewolf
yeah,
origin where it suffered tremendously with everything else around it. And that's the issue with it. But it looks amazing. It's
yeah.
amazingly shot, amazingly made. It's just, it lacks story, it lacks depth, and it actually lacks great performances or
Performance.
even good performances.
Yeah, I would unfortunately agree. When I first started the film and it opened, and I was kind of like, what is really going on? Like, these people are, they're gypsies, they're speaking a different language. Like,
Mhm.
she's like, we need to get the silver ready, like, something's coming. And then all of a sudden, like, the worst case scenario happens. Like, and it is brutal. And
Mm.
it is shot beautifully. Like, I was sitting there watching, I was like, yo, I'm in for something. Like, I think
Mhm.
the opening set me up so bad because the last shot where you see a scarecrow, that's all I can really say.
Mhm.
And then it pans out to something else. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, all right, I'm hip. I'm ready. You know
But
what I'm saying?
to cut you off real quick, before you even get to the scarecrow scene, which is kind of like 15 or so minutes, maybe 20 minutes into the film, the opening trench scene of
Yeah.
this film, as
Ooh,
they just show them in
yeah.
battle, it
Yeah, that was a
it's
great war
it's an
sequence.
amazing war sequence. It
It
will
is.
once you see that, it puts you in a mindset of this is going to be a great movie, and then you follow that up with what happens with the scarecrow scene. That again, we're not going to tell you what happens, but when you get to the scarecrow scene, you're just like, okay, I am ready and prepared. And
Yeah.
then you go through another hour and 20 minutes still being ready and prepared.
Yep.
That's the problem.
Yep. Because after that point, the movie was plagued by a lot of horror trope things that I didn't like,
Yeah.
which was countless jump scares that didn't work for me. Not
Yeah.
one jump scare that kind of came out. I was like, why is this? this isn't even scary. Like, this isn't pointless. Like, you're showing me you have the capacity for great imagery, great depth of field, great like positioning and like shot analysis, but you're giving me these jump scares that don't make any sense. And I think to Lucas's point, when it comes to trying to reinvent the wheel, with this, they didn't even have to reinvent anything. They really could have just kind of kept the progression and let us assume whatever this actually meant. When you keep going into like a lot of exposition as to the silver and why the silver is this and what the gypsies were doing, like you lose all flavor of richness that the story could have had. Even to the point where there's a scene with a whole bunch of kids, right? And these kids are kind of like circled around like a scarecrow. And it ain't even so much what happens, it's so much more like the conversation. Like these kids are like, did you have this? Did you see this? Like, yeah, I had this. Like, what? And you start like, oh, wow, this is dope. Like, you know, is this psychological? Is this supernatural? Like, you could have played with that and ran with it. And instead, you give an explanation and then something in action happens. And then everybody from that point does the most stupid of decisions ever. The character that plays the daughter, which is hard because they show her much older in the a very specific point in the film that I don't want to say because I don't want to allude too much. But throughout the film, you see her more younger, and I'm just like, she's not giving you anything. Like, she's a literal character that is there for no reason. And some of the information that she knows, some of the things that she's seen, she chooses to be quiet about it. And I was just irritated by her character. It's not the actress, it was just the way that they used her.
It's the way she was written. The character wasn't written well at all. This movie reminded me of another movie from a studio that should end up buying this movie. Because while I don't think it's a really good movie, definitely not the best horror movie, it fits in play with what this app does. I saw a movie last year on Shudder called Blood Vessel, where they attempted to replay the wheel, kinda, of the vampire origin. And this reminded me of this, and it fell into the same issues that movie had. Of, at times, when someone creates a wheel, you could just leave it right there. I don't need to recreate anything. When I attempt to show you different ways that now we can create these monsters versus the classic way that people are accustomed to, it leads people to being disconnected from the crux of the story, which is creating these monsters. That was the issue with 8 for Silver, is that when we see the transformation, it throws you off because you're like, wait, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
And why did we choose to go about it this way? Yeah. Again, as Sam said, it's a beautiful setup, an amazing setup. And if they would have just went with the supernatural elements of that setup, and brought in the original origins of what we know to be a werewolf movie, this movie would have been great.
Yeah.
Instead, they introduce us to a new origin of werewolves and a new werewolf that looks an awful lot like a demon dog that I've seen in like Constantine or any of those movies. Like,
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters dog. Yeah. Like, it just doesn't play well. And that's the issue with this movie. Is at times it just doesn't play well, but it's shot well.
Yeah.
The opening sequences are amazing. Yeah. The score is good. Like,
it's a
so
really
many
good score.
Positive things about this movie. And then one thing that fails this movie is the story. It completely fails this movie.
Yeah, even as I'm not the biggest horror buff or gore buff or anything, but there are some scenes that are shot in this. There's a couple different water sequences. There's a couple different acts of violence, but then there's like a autopsy sequence that I was like, yo, this was dope. Like, even the way that it was actually done and the way that they shot it and the way that they captured it, it was so good, but it didn't the execution of why they did it and the ramifications of why they did it was just dumb.
Yeah.
And it was weird because they put so much effort into all different acts of violence. Like it was almost like it was beautifully done.
You know what, Sam? You know what, Sam? You know the biggest issue is? It is hard for horror movies if you start at a 10. It is hard when you have to go back down to a 6 or a 5. Yeah. This movie starts on a high note that has not been seen by most horror movies.
No. Yeah.
And when it drops from that high note, all you are doing is comparing it to that high note. And then the movie suffers because of it. I think if you would have even attempted to keep that high note throughout, you'd have had one of the greatest horror movies ever made. If you would have started at what the movie was in the middle, you'd have had an okay horror movie. An okay horror movie. Not good, not bad, but just okay.
Yeah.
They shot for the stars and got there in its first 20 minutes, and then you're left with another hour and 20 minutes of just dribble at times that you're just like, why are we going to this area? Why are these characters making these decisions that make absolutely no sense? Like it's so many issues with that. But again, Sundance Film Festival, this is the time where we get to see these independent films.
Yeah.
I don't think 8 for Silver has actually been picked up for distribution yet. I don't recall hearing any news about it being picked up for distribution yet. So again, it's still available out there for a horror house like Shutter. I'm going to say that name again because if you don't buy this movie, it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah,
because it literally
easy grab.
It literally fits on no one else's radar. I can't imagine unless it's just a smaller independent company that's just looking for content to put out. Other than that, it's not going to fit on anyone else's radar.
Yeah, it wouldn't fit on Neon or Blumhouse. This wouldn't be an A24. This would definitely be better fit on Shudder. I mean, one other thing, and this is probably this left a bad taste in my mouth at the end of the movie. There's a character that does something that I felt like was the most idiotic thing I've ever seen, honestly, in a horror movie in a long time. Like, because, some horror movies, like, just for show, it's kind of like they're dumb to die. They're made to do this. But this character made this decision to do this one thing, and it made no sense. And then the movie ends, and you're like, what was this? What was the
point of doing it?
Point of any of it? Because they laid such a great groundwork with the mythology of the Silver. I was kind of like, okay, finally, I'm gonna get the understanding of the why. I'm gonna get the understanding of this person and talking to this other person, why the Silver is of significance. And they don't. They don't do nothing with it at all.
It's a horror movie that starts off stronger than most horror movies have the right to start off with, but then for some odd reason, instead of pulling it back to earth, they dropped it completely and said, "Hey, we still got to do traditional horror movie tropes and see how it works," and it suffers greatly from that. So, Sam, what do you give 8 for Silver?
Jeez, why you gotta do that?
Because you were going to try to do that to me.
I would rest this at either a 4 or a 5 out of 10. It's in between there for me. I'll give it a 5 because the cinematography was beautiful. It did have some amazing moments, but the story was fleeting. Acting outside of the children in the very beginning was bad. Like, there's one child actor that I was kind of like, yo, he's doing such a good job, and it goes nowhere. But yeah, that's where I'm gonna rest. I'm either 4.5 or a 5 out of 10 for me.
Wow. Well, I'm going to clearly give it. I think we're going to possibly for the first time be close to each other here. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. I brought up Blood Vessel because it was another reimagining of a very classic monster movie for me. that it really compares well to, not the way it's shot or anything of that nature. But I think I gave Blood Vessel a 5 out of 10. And that's because it never left its tone. Like Blood Vessel remained a solid, creepy form throughout the entire thing. 8 for Silver doesn't. And it's puzzling to me that it doesn't. Because I know what this director can do. And from the beginning of this film, you see what this director can do. I'm just hoping from this and his past work, someone takes over and gives him a bigger horror movie to do and less writing to do in it.
Yeah.
Stick strictly to his ability to direct because it's great. He can set up a shot. He can do everything humanly possible as a director you would want. Because 8 for Silver doesn't look like a cheap movie.
Not at all.
Any stretch of an imagination does this look like a cheap movie. It looks like high gloss, high class horror art at its best. Very reminiscent of a film that I told Sam when I saw it that it also reminded me of, and that was Crimson Peak. And I didn't like that movie either. And for the same reasons I don't like this movie. When you start off at a point and then you drop, and when you drop, it's no recovery. So 4 out of 10 for me for 8 for Silver, which was my biggest pick for the Sundance Film Festival this year.
Yeah, Lucas got me hyped up about it, and I was kind of like, oh, snap, I'm hyped. Okay, Lucas recommended, we're going for it. But I did think about that this film, it did bring a film to my mind. I think it came out like maybe 2017. I don't think we've ever talked about it, but I want to review it with you. It's called Affliction. And it is kind of like a retelling of a classic horror type of genre. And I think it was executed really well. But yeah, we'll talk about that later on off camera. But Affliction, when you guys get a chance, go check it out, and you'll be prepared for our maybe review of it. We're out, you guys. Peace.